You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتلمين هناك لشوارزنيجر.
Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Dunseth is no longer indeed. Duane Rollins here, Kevin Laramee on the line with us. Join us to talk about the USA-Mexico game on Friday is Brian Dunseth from Sirius XM. Counterattack there. Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How you guys doing?
Good. The obvious question, was there a symbolism, a psychological advantage lost to the United States on Friday night with the famous Dunseth no longer?
Yeah, without a doubt. All the conversation, all the hype, all the psychological advantage was around Dunseth. And the moment that ball goes in and takes that deflection, it's all off the table. And for as harsh and critical as I've been on Juan Carlos Osorio over the years, for kind of teasing him about trying to be a tactical savant and failing miserably at times, he pulled a rabbit out, and he was a massive, massive difference in terms of the preparation. We heard about the psychologist coming in and working with the team. It was kind of a masterstroke in terms of preparation and then execution in a tough environment where history says the United States should be walking away with 3 points.
Yeah, well, exactly. And the U.S. hasn't really faced a great deal of adversity in World Cup qualifying over the last few cycles. Is this maybe the biggest challenge that they've faced yet, having the no points on the board after one game at home, going to Costa Rica, a place that they never scored, never won before? Is this the biggest challenge they've faced in the last few cycles?
Yeah, but I would answer that in kind of two ways. Number one, I think CONCACAF qualifying regionally has been historically weak when you compare and contrast to Africa, to Europe, to South America, and CONMEBOL. So there's really, in my mind, there's only really 3 or 4 big games. Obviously, that's home and away against Mexico, so you're just taking those 2 games off the table. And then historically, it had been at Costa Rica playing at Saprissa. Now it's a little bit different with playing at the National Stadium over in the park. And Panama have made it incredibly difficult as well on the road. So yes, the other side of this is that a Mexico-U.S. rivalry, especially when it comes to the Hex, we've always talked about you get your 3 points at home and you try to figure out a way to get a point on the road. Previewing this match, we knew it was going to be incredibly difficult because it's the weird one-off right off the beginning. You'd hope to get a little bit of more rhythm, a little bit more confidence heading into the cycle, maybe starting off a little bit easier. But now the backs are against the wall, and I would agree. This is a very telling approach in the next 48 hours for Jurgen Klinsmann and the team itself, dealing with some big names with injuries, but absolutely no excuses can be laid.
If we go back to Friday night, late 89th minute, the winning goal for Mexico, how deflating was that goal, and does it really make the game against Costa Rica almost a must-result situation?
Yeah, it is a must-win. People won't want to say that, but you don't want to be coming out of the first phase of Hex, the first 2 matches, strong World Cup quality opponents with 0 points. I was right before you guys called. I was going back and watching the highlights and just watching each individual goal and each post hit. And you see Rafa's goal. And if you go back, if you're a fan of Liga MX, you've watched Rafa do this ever since he's come back. I think he scored 4 or 5 goals in a very similar manner. He loves that front post run. So when you head into a match, you've got the assistant coaches and Jurgen ultimately responsible for the individual matchups, who takes who. And when I watched the way, it was kind of a weird zonal individual marking, but with zonal tendencies. Brooks just lets him go. Josie was never prepared to see him come off the left shoulder, and Rafa just that deft little flick. It's devastating. It's deflating, especially with the second half performance. But again, I think it goes back to the very beginning, the very start. Everything that I saw was that a Mexican team was prepared under Juan Carlos Osorio, depending on how the opponent rolled out on the field. And the moment that they came out in that 3-5-2, I think even in the post-game, it was very telling for Juan Carlos Osorio to say, because the Germans normally don't come out in a three-back system. So it ultimately told me that team, especially with the way Vela came over and Layun went over to left back, they were prepared for whatever system the United States faced. And again, the Tinkerman, Juan Carlos Osorio, I got to give him credit, because the failure against Chile, everyone had the target on his back and unscathed even after losing Guardado 20 minutes in.
You mentioned Rafa Marquez, Brian. Over the last few years, he found the fountain of youth back in Mexico after a very tough stint with the Red Bulls.
Yeah.
With hindsight, what didn't work with Rafa Marquez with the Red Bulls? Was it this style of play, his motivation, a little everything combined, physical play? Because the Liga MX is a physical league. It is a league where it is very difficult to travel, very difficult to play as well. And he seems to have found his foot.
It's definitely different styles. You talk to any of the guys here in the States that have come over from Europe, and the first thing they mention is the game's 100 miles an hour, and there's no tempo, there's no rhythm. And you even go back to kind of conversations that Zlatan has made public about Thierry Henry, and he talking about MLS is, finding the right pass, hitting the right foot, finding them in stride. Everything's just a little bit different. I think for Rafa, he's kind of a hybrid, and we see this every time the Mexican national team plays. Is he playing in the midfield? Is he playing as a sweeper? Is he playing as a marking back? I've always viewed Rafa as a complementary piece. He's not a guy that you necessarily want to build a team around, but if you have the right players in the system that you're trying to play, better. In Liga MX, time and space it's more of a tactical understanding, whereas here in the United States, it's run as hard as you can, run as fast as you can. A really high tempo in terms of fitness is expected all the time. So I think he has a fountain of youth. You can tell from the desire to play at that level and to compete every single day and to be 37. It takes you got to be a different animal just in your mindset, your approach every single day. But yeah, I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent, it definitely didn't work out at New York Red Bulls, but it's working for him in Mexico.
Brian, I feel at this point, everyone has an opinion on Klinsmann. Everyone sort of has taken their take out there, hot, cold, whatever. But that said, obviously, after he loses this game, you have to evaluate him again. Is there anything we learned about Klinsmann on Friday that we didn't know that would add to this narrative?
No. It's Jurgen. I mean, just when you think you understand, you don't. We've seen him play around with a bunch of different formations. We thought, I think a lot of us, especially the ex-players that kind of talks amongst ourselves, that we found something in Copa Centenario, playing kind of that hybrid of a 4-3-3 with Bedoya and Jermaine and Michael sitting in front of that back four, and then Bobby Wood and Yossi Zardes playing kind of high off the shoulder formations off Clint Dempsey. But I mean, you're only as good as what your roster is available. I think at times when you're kind of a head coach. One of the things that I've learned over the years, especially being in more of an analyst role and traveling around and meeting with coaches, I think the ones that are most successful are coaches that look at their roster and say, okay, this is what I have available first and foremost due to suspension and injury. And this is where I kind of hide the weaknesses of my team. I think that's why Bruce Arena has been so insanely successful, is that even with the biggest names missing, he's figured out ways to complement the positives and really hide or negate the negatives. And so coming into the match, we knew that Clint was missing. We knew that Josh was missing. The surprise was Jeff Cameron missing. So Jeff Cameron, I think, is the first. Well, first is Jermaine, reintroducing him because you knew Jermaine was going to beat Jermaine Jones, was going to be in the starting 11. Then the second one was, how are you going to hide the injury of Jeff Cameron? And then his electing to start Timmy Chandler based on this perception that he's in the best form of his life right now at Eintracht Frankfurt and dropping DeAndre Yedlin. I think those three things led to his idea of going to a 3-5-2. But I guess I'm most fascinated by his post game, where he kind of threw Jermaine and Michael under the bus in his formation, and stating it wasn't a 3-5-2, it was more a 3-4-3. In the locker room, you guys know as well as I do, when a coach kind of publicly calls you out, it doesn't necessarily go well, especially when it's big name players. They're all big boys. But at the same time, I think there was a definite frustration in the approach and the fact that team was getting overrun until Guardado's injury, when they could make some tactical adjustments, get themselves back into the game.
All right, let's turn our attention to the next game. As you say, you called it a must-win. What approach do you do? I mean, is it possible to predict with them? Probably not. But if you're in charge, what approach do you take down to Costa Rica to try and get back on track?
Well, I guess it all depends, right? We know that Duane is in and Timmy's out. Now we're hearing whispers that it's months rather than weeks when it comes to his adductor injury. I would be absolutely shocked if we don't see kind of a flat 4-back system down in Costa Rica. I guess I would expect Fabian, John Brooks and either Omar or Matt Beasler, even though it's always weird to me to think about two left-footed center backs. And then the question is it Timmy Chandler or is it DeAndre Yedlin? Jermaine, how did he recover after this 90 minutes, knowing that it was the first time he's played a full match since late June? And then ultimately, I think he's found something with Pulisic, Josie, and Bobby Wood. But I guess we all forgot. I mean, what happened to Sasha? Sasha in that playmaker role underneath the two strikers in that 4-0 win against Trinidad and Tobago. He was a victim of circumstance of reintroducing Jermaine. So I would expect a little bit more steel, a little bit more of a hesitation in terms of all attacking approach. But you know that Oscar Ramirez and that mustache is going to be definitely ready to throw everything forward that they possibly can. And whether that's Azofefa, whether that's Bolaños, whether that's Borges, whether it's Brian Ruiz, even Joel Campbell coming off the bench, Johan Venegas. I mean, I keep saying this is a much stronger Costa Rica side than they're getting credit for. I would say that this Costa Rican side, and I'm going to step out of bounds here, is just as dangerous as what we saw from the Mexican side, depending on how that formation is set up tactically from Oscar Ramirez.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, Brian. I was going to ask about Costa Rica, the Los Ticos and their MLS contingent, led yesterday, the last Friday, by Bolaños, Matarrita, Kendall Watson, Venegas being influential when he was subbed in at the 78th minute for Brian Ruiz. Are you impressed by Los Ticos? Are you impressed by the constant rise? Not too much at a time, but slowly they're becoming a powerhouse in CONCACAF.
Yeah, they are. And people don't want to really admit it, I think, here in the States. And whether that's egotistical or whether that's just them not truly being educated enough or savvy enough to recognize. I mean, you go for historically over the last couple of years, and you really do think about the run of players that have gone overseas, but gone kind of the path less traveled. And then Joel Campbell, his move to Arsenal, 5 years ago before he was sent out on loan. Over the years, I think it was really a statement. Bolaños and Borges, they are tempo players, rhythm players, incredibly tactically astute, technically very, very, very good. Brian Ruiz has always been kind of a hybrid. You're not really sure if he's a front runner or if he's a wide player, but he can kind of play both. But then they found this layer of success with Gamboa on one side, Matarrita on the other, kind of playing these hybrid roles of kind of what the U.S. was expecting to see in Fabian Johnson and Timmy Chandler the other night. But even Umania, MLS experience, obviously Kendall Watson and his size and his strength and his presence. Acosta, Navas in goal. It's a damn good team, and I just don't think it's gotten enough credit. That still, you got so many good players off the bench. Wallace, Salvatierre, Guzman, Morera, Oviedo. It's a deeper team than people give it credit for. I think it's one of the sleeper teams in CONCACAF in terms of the overall perception of quality in the region.
I would be remiss, Brian, if I didn't ask your opinion on the Major League Soccer playoffs so far, the MLS Cup playoffs, which the East is Canadian. But what's your thought on the playoffs so far?
It's definitely been a surprise for me to see how quickly Montreal has gelled together, especially after everything that kind of happened leading into that DC United game. I think if you look at Bernadello, you look at Bernier, you look at Donadel, you look at Simon, Piatti, the fact that they were able to bring that group together despite kind of the outside confusion surrounding Didier Drogba. To see teams do so well, like the New York Red Bulls and FC Dallas, and then in that break where you think, yeah, it's great psychologically, physically, everyone's gonna get rested. There is something to say in this league about momentum, and momentum's a killer at times if you're on the uptick. And I think we're seeing that right now with Montreal and Seattle in particular. But now with the international break, now with a couple of injuries coming into play, very, very fascinated to see what this first leg in the conference finals look like.
Yeah, I think you have to wait to see if Josie and Michael get out of this international break completely free to evaluate Toronto fully for sure. Let's talk about Josie real quickly. His reemergence after the injury this year has been great to see, both at club and country level. Do you think that Altidore ever truly will be appreciated for the player he is, or is he sort of going to always just be that enigma that people love to hate?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, I know that I respect the hell out of him. And people forget, he's 2 games away from hitting his 100th cap for the U.S., and he's only 27. I think he's just been around so long. And I think, unfortunately for Josie, there's a segment of this fan base here in the States that looks at his time in Europe as a failure and then judges him on it. They'll look at Hull City, they'll look at Sunderland, but they won't take into account that he was a kid at, 20 years old, 19 years old, that was bought by Villarreal for $10 million. That he was absolutely killing it at Alkmaar, but there's just not a lot of respect because it's quote unquote not Premier League. The biggest thing for Josie has been and always will be the perception of injury and health. But to see what he's done since coming back in the late summer with Giovinco, his size, his strength, his athleticism, I think he's highly underrated technically as a footballer, as a soccer player. But if you go back and you watch the Bobby Wood goal at the start of the second half, you watch some of his individual technique, even the free kick that Talavera touched right over the post. I don't think we've ever had another Josie Altidore. We've had a couple players that have been close. I would say Eddie Johnson being the closest physically to replicating Josie. But you can even, you talk about how important Josie is. Go back to the 2014 World Cup. Jurgen, and I still can't figure this out, didn't have a single player physically that could replicate what Josie did. Even Bob, when Charlie Davies got in that car accident, he had Robbie Finley kind of try to replicate what Charlie did. But Josie's size, his strength, his presence, Clint's not like him. Jordan Morris isn't like him. Alan Gordon and Chris Wondolowski definitely aren't like him. We just don't have another player that's like Josie Altidore.
Fair enough. Speaking of players that we don't have a lot of in Major League Soccer, Sebastian Giovinco was left off the Italian roster for kind of a reason that's got a lot of people defensive over here, that's saying that the league basically that he played in, quote unquote, didn't matter. Thoughts on that and whether or not there's any truth to it at all? Are we being too defensive in North America when we react to comments like that?
No, you're not at all. I felt the same way. I got pissed when I saw those quotes. But it's kind of the little brother versus the big brother mentality. We want so badly for Major League Soccer to be taken seriously, and that's the biggest perception. I've said it for a long time now, and I remember watching Sevajivenko in the Toulon tournament when he was 17, playing with the Italian national team. Inevitably, the biggest problem for the United States in Major League Soccer isn't going to be identifying the players, isn't going to be spending the money to get the players. It's going to be convincing the players to walk away from Champions League and Europa League. And once you can do that, and the perfect example is Giovinco, who at the time was an impact sub coming from Juve and was a fringe national team player, wasn't a consistent starter, but was an impact sub. That was step one. But that's the next phase, is getting away from this idea that, and I say this with the utmost respect, the Gerrards, the Lampards, the Pirlos, those type of players. Once you can get away from that identity of a retirement league, the Drogbas, that's the next big step. But I think first and foremost, we should probably try to be the best in our region before we start comparing and contrasting ourselves over to Europe. And that starts with just the battles in CONCACAF Champions League against Mexican sides, because there has been a drastic difference despite how close the United States has come to winning CCL action.
Fair enough, Brian. How can people listen to you in Sirius?
Monday through Tuesday through Friday usually is 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern on Channel 85. All
right, Brian Dunseth, thanks very much.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thanks for having me.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Thanks again to Brian for joining us. Kevin, what thoughts that you have on the year? We're going to get into Canada, Korea briefly in a minute. I mean, it's not a lot to break down there, but we will talk about it. Thoughts on the United States finally losing that game in Columbus?
We kind of saw it coming a little bit, didn't we, Duane? The way we talked about it last week, I re-listened to the show. For me, Mexico was a team that had things to prove because of the way they played in the Centennial Cup last summer. But we were forgetting that Marquez and Gio were not part of that club, that selection. This time around, they were, and they were instrumental in the way Mexico was able to break down the United States late in that game. And, it's interesting to see that now Juan Carlos Osorio, when he has time to have actually the players informed that he wants available and mold them into a formation that's tactically right for that situation, he's successful. If he's just putting a tournament last minute with a roster half of what he likes, it will be like it was in the Centennial Cup. Giving time, it's interesting how he can perform like this. Because for Mexico, let's face it, this was one of their biggest games of their schedule as well.
Yeah, and I think that it was a game in many ways, and I hate to get into these intangibles and these unqualifiable sort of things, but there was a little bit of they wanted more in that game. I think 89th minute winner at home. It's hard to overcome that. It's hard to come around to the idea that you match the intensity when you're giving up a late equalizer at home like that. Now, the thing about the Hex is it is remarkably forgiving. We've always said this up here, that if Canada could just find a way into that, then maybe they'd have a chance. Now, that said, I'm looking at this, and I think there's a big gap between the fourth place team in this Hex and fifth and sixth. I truly believe Panama is an underrated, a sleeper team in this to probably grab the fourth spot. I think that, Brian said it, that Costa Rica is underrated as well, but I think that Costa Rica, they may be the best team. They may be battling with Mexico right now for 1 and 2, because I truly think that the U.S. right now might be slotted in at that 3 spot, and I'm not sure that's a lot of Americans have completely come around to that idea. But the idea that they're going to fall 5th and miss the World Cup, it's hard to wrap your head around that. It's hard to make an argument for that makes any sense. you'd have to have one of Honduras or TNT step up to a level that I don't think many of us see them being able to reach, Kevin.
Well, Panama traveled to Honduras last Friday and got the 1-0 victory. Honduras, which for Canadian fans is always nice to see them lose at Estadio Olímpico. It doesn't happen often, and Panama pulled the kind of an upset, or just tells you where Honduras is in the sixth. Right now, I would believe they were fifth. TNT is the last, in my opinion, of those 6 teams, if I had to rank them right now. Costa Rica 2-0 against TNT, Duane. And Venegas was instrumental for the build-up of the second goal that came late in that game. It was something in the 78th minute. So for the Montreal Impact fan, it's great to see Venegas play in a time where he might be getting some confidence. Every time he goes to the national team, we talk about, oh, maybe he's going to come back and finally have that spark that make him break the starting 11 and have a run with the Impact. Hasn't happened yet. Maybe this time around with the playoff is the time. But what impressed me, Duane, in that game is Bolaños, Matarita, even Kendall Watson. It was 2-0 at the end of that game, but it could have been 6-7. Costa Rica really played well on the road against Stephen Hart's TNT.
Yeah, quarterfinalists in the last World Cup. At the time, we thought it might have been a one-shot deal, but it's increasingly becoming more and more evident that Costa Rica has rose its game up to the level of the U.S. and Mexico in the region, which is going to make it all the more difficult for the countries below, including Canada, to ever close that gap. But we'll keep moving forward. Quickly, a last thought on that. I don't think, as I just said, there's much of a chance of the U.S. finishing fifth in this. I put it at 1%. There's always a percent, right? But by and large, it's 99% likely that they're going to advance from this round. But the question does remain, is it possible, if the U.S., especially if they lose this next game to Costa Rica, you then start thinking about the possibility of them being forced to play in the Interconfederation playoffs? I don't know. Depends on what you think of Panama, right?
Well, exactly. It depends how Panama performs in Costa Rica. It really will be interesting, that game in Costa Rica. Because if the United States win, Costa Rica doesn't get the win. So that will be interesting. If Costa Rica wins, which is I would say 60-40 right now, if I had to judge it, there's a 60% chance in my mind, which tells take it for what it is. It's 60-40. So Costa Rica has a chance to win. But if the United States win, then all is good for the U.S. and for it's going to become complicated. But if Costa Rica wins, Costa Rica will be top of the group. And, depending on Mexico. But Mexico, again, have a tough game in March. Costa Rica, it's going to be very complicated. Costa Rica could very well be the top team. Then Mexico, then Panama. If they can get that win against U.S., you never know. It's not going to be easy for the U.S. to win in Panama too.
Yeah. All right, let's segue out and provide a couple minutes conversation on the Canadian friendly on Friday. Look, this was early in the morning on a YouTube stream. Actually, it wasn't a YouTube stream. It's a live, some other company that streams at any rate. Can't even get YouTube. Anyway.
You're mean.
Look, I'm going to give this 3 minutes because 3 minutes is about what it deserves. I remember the back-to-back coin flip championships of CONCACAF in 2000 and 2002 when Canada won coin flips to advance into the group in 2 World Gold Cups in a row, to then go on to have success in the knockout round in 2000. We all know that they won the Gold Cup. The only team other than Canada, other than the United States and Mexico, to win the World Cup is Canada in the year 2000. And there's
the Gold Cup, not the World Cup. No, Canada. No,
like you say, World Cup.
Yeah, no, Gold Cup. We never won the World Cup, and maybe we'll never win. Jeez, don't get me started on that tournament.
Yeah, there you go. The Gold Cup, I'm of course talking about. Yeah, the only team other. That's a good trivia question. It's getting far enough around that there's got to be fans out there that aren't aware of that, like newer fans. So you could probably really trip them up on that one.
There's a lot of fans that are not even aware of the Gold Cup itself.
Yeah, precisely. At any rate, then the follow-up one, and everyone forgets about this one, is in 2002 to defend their Gold Cup championship. Canada actually made it to the semifinals, and they lost in that. There was third-place games at the time, and they went on to beat South Korea, the Korean Republic, in the third-place game. And I was thinking about that game as I was watching it in the middle with blurry eyes at 6 a.m. on Friday. As I'm watching this Korean team just completely overrun Canada in every aspect, tactically, physically, everything. They were just murdering the Canadians in the first half. It was embarrassing to watch. It's like, how does that gap get that big in that short of time? They beat this team in a competitive game 15 years ago. How does it happen? And the only thing that you can go back to, and people ask this question all the time, I was going through my normal process this morning, and I see another article talking about why does the Canadian men's team not do so well compared to the women's? And that's always the debate we get into men's and women's because of obviously we won't get into that conversation, but the whole conversation about why the men aren't that good is, we've answered it 50,000 times. There's only so many ways to answer it. We lost a generation. We did a lot of mistakes at the grassroots. We didn't develop players for 15 years. We were in the middle of it at that point in 2002 when we were winning that third place game. The generation before had come through at a time when the Canadian Soccer League, not the corrupt one, the real one, is existing. And they were able to produce enough players to get a CONCACAF. Obviously, I think that the other clubs weren't as good back then either. Teams, I mean, not clubs. So it all factored in. But yeah, we've lost a generation and we're still paying that price. And this is the message that I kept thrusting home in the last cycle, is that we were overperforming based on the talent level that was there, because this was the lost cycle. It always was going to be the lost cycle. And that game against Korea just drove that home. They only lost 2-0 because basically the Koreans took their foot off the gas in the second half. It could have been ugly. They were just so much tactically, technically, physically better than the Canadian national team, and it's going to take more years. And, I look at 202, I fast forward, I look at some of the stuff that's happening with the private academy, some of the stuff that's happening with leagues like Ligue 1 Ontario. I look at the rumors about the Canadian Soccer League providing an opportunity for this next young crop of this next young generation to come through. And I have a little bit of hope for that, hope that we can maybe make a hex. But the idea that we're going to close that gap to get to where Korea is, to get back to where we once were, and be able to conceive of an idea of making a World Cup, not a Gold Cup, a World Cup, and being at all competitive in it, it's depressing how far-fetched that seems, Kevin.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting, too, that I will see the effect of it in the near future, and that is like 3 to 5 years, Jason DeVos's role now with the Canadian Soccer Association, the fact that his vision, and he talked about it many times, and he has his coaching license, and he's a very informed and interested in finding not a new way, but a different path to development, to standard base, to what he did with the Oakville Soccer Association 2 years ago. He would like to probably implement that on a national level, or trying to look at it, and his role will be important in the shape that the development for the new Canadian Soccer Association pathway, basically, in the next few years. It'll be interesting what his contribution is and what he can change. I don't want to paint him as the Messiah, but he is a voice that's added to the conversation, and he's been an advocate for so long that now it's going to be interesting to see that what he talked about for years on TSN, how he can apply that to the Canadian Soccer Association pyramid.
All right, we ended up giving him 5 minutes, so we're going to take a break now, and we'll always cover Canada. Don't worry, but when the hex is starting, we gotta move forward.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcast under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS post-game show, Open Lines After Dark, Five Rings Daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at sports.net, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
Super Frank, big fat, what?
Duane, I'm actually going to make a counterpoint to that. We're going to talk about Steven Gerrard, Frank Lampard. If you just look at it on paper, yeah, Gerrard was atrocious. It was just so hard. 34 appearances for the LA Galaxy, 5 goals, and one of those goals, well, it actually doesn't count the penalty, which was his last goal as an LA Galaxy player. 5 out of 34 in a role that was supposedly more offensive for him, going after a few years in Liverpool, that he was going deeper in the midfield. LA Galaxy and Steven Gerrard. Was Gerrard the worst MLS DP ever, Duane?
Oh, no, Marquez might have been.
True. Yeah, we talked about it earlier, but maybe
Yeah. Well, what Brian said was interesting about like how we always sort of I think our default is to blame the intensity or the motivation, and they're there to be on the beach or whatever. And Ashley Cole actually had a good season, speaking of sitting on the beach. But nonetheless, I do think that there's maybe something to that it's that players. It's not so much that they want to come over here and tarnish their reputation by not trying. I think it's that they come over here and realize, oh shit, this is hard. Which I guess we're gonna have to put the warning on that one. At any rate, they're gonna they don't necessarily understand that the intensity level is what's going to be required of them. And I think that might happen a little bit with Gerard, who was never the most physical player anyway. He was more of an intelligence, more of a technical player than he was a pure physicality player at his best anyway. So he comes over here, and it always seemed like a bad fit. Truthfully, other than the marketing aspect, and we haven't all understood the marketing aspect, there's a lot of Liverpool fans. And look, he for those that don't know, to break this down, both Lampard and Gerrard, I find this interesting on a sort of meta level. Both of them announced they were basically leaving MLS on their Instagram account over the last weekend. So it does seem like they're both gone. It's not official from the teams, but in Gerrard's case, he was taking a photo, I guess, probably in his backyard overlooking the valley. It was a beautiful little site. He was giving a little sign. It's actually a devil's horn sign for some reason, and saying, it's been great living here. Is all in past tense. I'm going to miss you. Things like that. Was a similar announcement.
Well, when you look
go ahead.
I was like, when you look at Lampard, though, the 29 appearances for New York City, because he did play for Manchester City, but for 29 for New York City FC, 15 goals, and a few of them were scored by his ties and his bums, but still 15 goals in 29 games. Not too bad considering all the drama that first started his MLS career, basically.
Yeah, and I think when you're having a debate about which of these two was a worse signing, the stats sort of spell it out. Both are offensive players, so you can look at the offensive numbers, and clearly Lampard had more of an impact. But then you have to factor in that other stuff, which is harder and harder to remember, but certainly it did have a very negative influence on how people perceive him in Major League Soccer.
Just imagine if those 6 months, because he was instrumental in City's play that
he played great for City.
Yeah, so imagine what he would have done with New York City FC with Villa in those first 6 months. They would have won the league in their first year. That's what could have been. That's how I see it, because the way he played for Manchester City, he would have been so valuable for New York City FC if the first 6 months he was there. They would have had a lot better first season, and who knows what would have been this year as well. Having lost in the playoff, maybe that doesn't happen if Super Frank plays 6 months more with the club and gets further in his MLS understanding, and maybe in 2 full seasons gets more out of it. I don't know. It's a what could have been. I still see with Frankie Lampard.
No, I look at Lampard in that long spell with Manchester City like this, is that imagine he was a sponge that was mostly dry. Okay, bear with me here. And Mino Pellegrini took that sponge and squeezed the life out of it to get like the last few drips of water out of the sponge. By the time he handed that completely dry sponge to NYCFC, there was nothing there. He was hurt, he was beat up, and he isn't old. You can't beat Father Time. It doesn't matter, right? He's still a smart player, and that's how he ended up getting back. He, took an off season to recuperate, got a little bit more water in the sponge, and they squeezed the last little bit out again. And I think that's what's happened with him. And there's a likelihood that these two men, both, there's suggestions that both might play more, but I think that the one that's least likely to play anymore is Lampard. I think that he now realizes as well that all the water has been squeezed out of the sponge, and he is going to take that dry sponge and start to. I'll leave the analogy now.
The China Super League actually pays a lot of money for you to come there and actually don't necessarily have to play at the highest level that you're used to. It's very different than MLS has. Maybe the China Super League is a new MLS, so the CSL, China Super League. I don't know if it's like the Caraport in Canada, but that China Super League does play their player a lot. Conditions and all that are very different than you used to. That was a shock for players like Didier Drogba and Anelkas back in a few years ago. But you do have a feeling that that's where maybe they'll end up, because they thought MLS was that, and they figured, oh wait, it's not. Let's find what that is.
Yeah, I think that they're more likely, but yeah, I can see them both in China, but at the same time, I think Lampard is more likely to retire in my mind. He's a little bit older, among other things, and Gerrard. I think Gerrard there were a lot of, we talked about this a few times that we have talked about him, that he just seemed like his heart never left the UK. His family stayed back there. He has a lot of connections in Liverpool. Obviously, that club means a great deal to him. That club thinks a great deal of him.
Liverpool's top of the table. He's not there. He feels like, I could have maybe won my first league.
Yeah, and certainly there's a suggestion that there might be some sentimentality to bring him back there, but as coaching or a coaching role or something, or even just as an impact sub, or just to sit in there and eventually be part of it.
As he writing gigs in the last season with United, like a player, almost like player / coach. You're just there for like 5 minutes sometimes.
Yeah, gigs and yeah. There's another rumor that's fascinating though too as well, and this is broken down in some of the English press. You're not hearing it over here as much, and that's people around him say that the only club outside of Liverpool in the UK that he has some sentimentality around it is Celtic, and there are suggestions because of Brendan Rodgers that being there that he may go back there to end his career at Celtic. This apparently, I'm getting the studio audience here does not agree with this. For the record, you know who the studio audience is, but nonetheless, it's something that's out there if you want to look at it. But I think the most likely place where he will land is in some capacity at Liverpool, where he will likely, I think, the fairest role for him there, for both himself and for the club, is to go in on some academy advisory coaching role to learn the craft there, kind of like Vera did, to learn the craft of coaching. And so that he has a very low key, he could be an ambassador for the club, he could be around Anfield, he can sort of add his voice, his vision, and it'd be like that. I mean, we don't want to bring him into a role like, where he's going to fail there. And I think a lot of Liverpool fans would agree with me that they'd love to see him back in theory, but they also don't want to see him fail because they want to remember him fondly. And that would be an opportunity to do something like that in my mind.
No, yeah, it would absolutely be. But when you're looking at the DP situation heading forward, have we seen the last wing of the Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard, where now we'll see more of the Piattis, Jovenkos, a little younger, maybe that goes with the MLS 3.0 that we keep talking about, where you kind of need that pace more to be effective. Maybe not younger, but the different style of play that a Lampard and Gerrard do not fit. What do you see in the DP situation heading to next year?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think you've got to tie the future of the DP rule in with TAM. And we're all sick of talking about TAM and BAM and CAM and DAM and RAM, but TAM. TAM, nonetheless, I think was MLS's sort of nod to the idea that you want to go to Central and South America and get those value signings, guys that are coming in at 500,000-700,000, and they can have a greater impact in the league. That's kind of something that's getting pressure from the coaches from the technical side of things. But I think that there still is a belief in the Major League Soccer headquarters that you also want to have a way to bring in these huge names. And so I don't think we're through that, because as much as it's a derivative sort of comment that people make about a Major League Soccer, it is a retirement league in the sense, bear with me, don't get defensive, in the sense that they do bring guys over like this, because there is a massive market. We've seen it here. I stood in that stadium at BMO Field when Pirlo came to visit and never touched the field, which was hilarious. But anyway, when he never touched the field, when it was full with guys wearing Juve jerseys, right? Like that still happens. We're not that far removed from the days when it was just about that. Obviously, there's a great growing grassroots support of Major League Soccer in every market, and especially in some markets. But you saw in Montreal, the impact were floundering in terms of ticket sales until Drogba came to town. So let's not pretend that these names, and Drogba obviously did well in the pitch. I'm not saying he didn't, but certainly he's older and he fits every bit of criteria that we always talk about when we're talking about these DPs, quote unquote, the retirement league.
And Duane, that he's got 1 or 2 left in him against Toronto. Come on, it's going to happen.
We'll see.
You know how Didier Drogba plays in a big game. Maybe that's a threat that's going to be. Still feels so far away. 22nd. Yeah, we're come already.
We're not touching this till next week, Kevin.
Jeez, can it? So far. So be a big O sold out, by the way.
Is it completely sold out now? Yeah, I know that.
Probably 5 individual tickets left or something.
Yeah, I mean, you can probably find someone stuff up and things like that, but I know that the TFC allocation, for those that don't know, and I don't think I reported this in the show because I took my birthday off on Friday, so I wouldn't have had a chance. They had 1,400 tickets that were sold to the away traveling support. They released them in blocks of 400, and there were 500, and then one last, 2 blocks of 500, and then a 400 block, and they were gone in less than 24 hours. So, there is a scattering of Toronto fans throughout the rest of the stadium too. So you can anticipate probably 2,000 traveling fans in a crowd of 57,000. It's going to be quite the spectacle in there for sure. It's going to be it's going to draw a lot of attention in Major League Soccer for those that have never watched a whatever derby you want to call it at that point, right? So it should be a lot of fun, and we'll give it a lot of coverage next week. We'll have some fun with it on a rivalry sense. We'll also take it seriously on an evaluation sense. We'll do what we do best, and that'll be a lot of fun next week. But final question on our topic of this block. Quick answer: yes, one or the other. Who's the worst signing of the two?
Well, Gerard, obviously. I would go with Steven Gerrard.
I think that, as you said, I say quick answer, then I don't get one. I say that Lampard, certainly what he did in the last half showed that he could still be a factor. And that's the thing about Lampard. I was kind of actually a little bit surprised that he, not from his own level, but from the NYCFC level, that they wouldn't have tried to keep him around. Maybe they did, because he was quite effective in a 20-minute role because it is just smart. He's able to get to good positions, especially when the players around him are tired.
No,
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Take a break. Come back with some bits and bites.
The bits and bites on Soccer Today.
St. Clair's album available.
Yes, St. Clair cheating on Google, iTunes, Bandcamp, and where you get your music. St. Clair.
Get it on Spotify too. You can subscribe to them and help them out that way as well. St. Clair. Anyway, that's we're going to give this the credit it deserves down the line this week. Obviously USA Mexico took a lot of our attention, so we wanted to get that guest in. But for today, I'm working on something else for tomorrow. Perhaps on Wednesday, I will be looking to try and book a New York Cosmos guest of some kind to talk about their big win. They, of course, are the NASL Soccer Bowl champions. A 1-0 victory. Basically, it was a 0-0 victory, and then they won on penalties. So you didn't get a lot of goals, but it was a decent back and forth game. 2 teams battling hard. Unfortunately for the Indy 11, they came up short in the penalty shootout. Ryan Richard, a former TFC player, scores the winning penalty. So maybe everything is coming up Toronto this year. Who knows, Kevin? At any rate, we'll see.
Yeah, the Cosmos are the NASL Cup champion for 2016. Will Gio Savarese come back as the Cosmos coach? Will he be in Minnesota? Will he be somewhere else? Because tactically, he's been able to use whatever he has. Sometimes it's bigger, better player with more experience. Sometimes it's younger, faster players. But he used what he has to, each and every year that he won the championship, use the correct way to do so with what he has and literally get the most out of his roster.
Yeah. Javesi is becoming the hipster's choice for next coach, and I'm playing into that role. I think we all are. Anyone who listens to shows like this is playing a part of that. He's not a name that's going to jump out and grab people's attention outside of NASL circles, but certainly if you look at what he's done with the Cosmos, and you put aside your sort of bias against the Cosmos, because there certainly is a lot of that out there. They think they're just a super club that buys titles, and objectively look at how that roster was changed and built and manipulated and used more of a Moneyball approach this year. You can be impressed with his ability to, as Lewis said to us, his ability to manage big stars, fading big stars, but nonetheless guys that have big histories in the past, like he did last year, and then his ability to sort of manipulate and work with guys that are still pretty well paid for NASL level. Let's not kid ourselves, but guys that don't have quite that same star power, and he has to be a little bit more cognizant of that. This is a team that ran away with the NASL combined season table by 10 points, and got it done in the playoffs, so they are worthy champions. And people can debate about whether it's good to have a super club. I think it is. I think that if the LA Galaxy in many ways have become the MLS super club, and I think MLS is better for the Galaxy in the sense that they give the rest of the teams a team to hate. Toronto does that a little bit too, I think, because of the money that they spend. So, and I do think that that's valuable. You want, I think it needs to be more organic when it comes to the parity that's there. A little bit of parity is good, but too much forced parity, especially, I don't like that. As I've said many times before, the Cousins, I congratulate them for them, and they are the NASL champions for 2016. Speaking of things to laugh at, I don't know what that segue was. It didn't make any sense.
Well, did you watch the Greece-Bosnia-Herzegovina game at the 69th minute? You kind of had something to laugh at.
Yeah, and Dzeko, I miss Ed Dzeko. He's the most talented player. I saw him in that practice that they had here, the open practice. My God, he's skilled when you see him up close. Anyway, but what he wasn't very skilled at is if you haven't seen this, I'm sure you have, but is that the most bizarre red card you've ever seen?
Yes, well, it was for 2 yellows, but the other player, Papadopoulos Socrates, got a straight red for the same for the move for the tackle that led to Dzeko pulling his pants down. Good thing the other guy was wearing tight trousers, so everybody was safe. It was safe for work soccer. That's always what we want: safe for work soccer. Hashtag SFW soccer. But it's interesting that happened, and it was, first of all, if you haven't seen the highlights of that game, the goal that came at the 93rd minute for Greece to tie it up 1-1 to stay undefeated in their European qualifier journey to the 2018 World Cup. That goal, reminiscing of Pogba a few weeks ago with Man United, a very top spin heavy shot that just seems like it's floating from the outside of the box to right in the top corner. Greece, Bosnia 1-1. But what a weird game.
Yeah, well, Greece is weird. I live in Greece, so I get to see it all the time. I love tzatziki, though. If anyone wants to give me a bat of tzatziki, I will happily bathe in it. But at any rate, that's no one really needs to know that. But I love tzatziki. Love it. I can eat it by the spoonful. Anyway, soccer can be fun sometimes, and I know it's a card, and it shouldn't be fun, but that is kind of fun. And you kind of like having that stuff, but there's not much to evaluate there. But if you've seen it, there's lots of finds and gifts out there.
Yeah, speaking of European qualifiers, which has some MLS implications as well and some Premier League implication, Belgium, Estonia, 8-1 for Belgium. Laurent Simon started that game for Belgium. Another great performance for the Montreal Impact defender with his national team. Like Roberto Martinez keeps on saying, Simon is one of the players that he relies on defensively to keep Belgium in a great position. A very impressive play by Carrasco and Hazard on the day. Hazard got subbed off with a little knock on the calf, but he should be fine. Another news concerning some MLS team, Montreal back again. Ambrosio Yongo played for Cameroon in a 1-1 draw with Zambia in the African qualifiers. He did have a little knock as well, but he mentioned on social media, they'll be fine, and do not worry, as Montreal people, he will be there for the final of the East.
Well, that's good to know. And so far, so good on the injury front for Toronto. I got about 3 messages that night when they knew that I was paying attention to the Montreal, to the U.S. Mexico game, and others one. It's like, just tell me that Josie and Michael are okay. That's like pretty much everything I'm getting now. Is I'm the injury watch person for TFC amongst TFC fans.
Well, speaking of injury watch, Tim Howard of the Colorado Rapids pulled an abductor in the groin area. And first of all, at the beginning, it was thought to be maybe just a not too serious injury. Now it might be mine. He's out for the MLS Cup playoff, possibly. And, Colorado will be right back to where they were at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, well, Zach Math probably didn't deserve enough credit as far as start. And this is a case where I guess, I'm not the biggest fan of Alex Bono, as most people know me, but nonetheless, you can't deny that having a guy play a significant amount of games does get that comfort level with the back line, and so you're less worried about an injury to the keeper. And I think that is the one aspect of this for Colorado that they've got to feel somewhat thankful about, is that because Howard didn't come till halfway in the year, that they do have a guy that played a lot and their confidence level probably won't drop as much. But
And
also,
not just that, the probability of another home and away series for Colorado going to penalties where Tim Howard was key difference in those penalties, it's very, very slim. So in a way, he might have already done his job, played his role in the Colorado Rapids journey in the MLS Cup playoffs.
yeah, look, and I mean, Colorado remains hard to handicap because they just score so infrequently and they rely so heavily on the defensive strategy. And, I welcome them to prove me wrong. But I still think that you need to have more goal scoring ability. You can't rely on simply shutting teams out every game because stuff happens. And when you have a hot team like Seattle in that Western final, most of us, and I think it's probably unfair to Colorado, but especially now with Howard out, most of us are picking Seattle to win that series, even though they are much further behind in the table. And this is just adding to that. The question with Howard is at his age, Colorado may have to make a big decision. If this injury is like 6, 7, 8 months, then do they really want to have a DP salary just in the injury room on that? I don't know what their way, even if there is a way out of that contract at this point, especially if Matt, let's just say for the sake of argument, steps up and gets the job done, runs an MLS Cup final, plays well in that. How is it helpful to Colorado to have Tim Howard on a DP salary? But
that. And just the fact that the type of injury that he suffered as well, the abductor in the groin area, is an injury that's very hard to diagnose the length of absence because it changes. It's a weird type of injury. It's easy to aggravate. It could be easy to aggravate. We'll see the results of MRIs and all the tests that he will have in the next few weeks and the rehab process, because there is a rehab process to get that type. And it's weird because it's a core muscle that you need for your balance. And for a keeper, you need that spring, that push when you dive, and that's exactly where that muscle comes to play. So it's an injury that for a goalkeeper is, I don't want to say tough to come back from, but it's tough to evaluate how long you'll be out.
Yeah, because you're sort of mobile, like your mobility matters so much as a keeper. You have to make quick movements left and right? And if you have any loss of strength at all, then it's going to affect everything about you. And you have to make sure that injury is completely healed 100%. Any injury is kind of like that, but for keeper, I think it's probably even more important that it's like 110% healed, so that they're coming back stronger, unless you're going to re-injure it. That's just my thought. I'm not a doctor, obviously, but that's kind of my thought on that. So it could be nearing the end for Tim Howard is the bottom line on that. That's unfortunate if he goes out with an injury, but all got to go out some way. Speaking of going out, if things don't turn around very quickly for the Canadian U20 women, and we haven't had an opportunity to talk much about this tournament yet in Papua New Guinea, they lost 5-0 to Spain, and this is not something that we're used to seeing amongst our women's program here. And there's a lot of questions about that in my mind, and I'm going to have to try and figure them out. I don't have answers yet. Obviously, Jessie Fleming was left off this team. Maybe they knew something about the talent level, and which is why they left Jessie Fleming back in the United States to play for UCLA. Yeah. Because 5-0, man, that's a hard one to swallow on the women's front. Canada beats teams 5-0 on the women's side, not the other way around. Spain has been making a lot of progress in the women's game. There's always been a suspicion in the back of my mind that the women's program might be in worse shape long-term than the men's program, and that's counterintuitive to people's minds, but based on the development failings in this country and the lack of opportunity for women to play at any level at all beyond. Yeah.
But Duane, we won a game in Honduras, U20 friendly, with Balou of the Montreal Impact, FC Montreal standout academy product, signed with the big club a few weeks ago. Balou scored for Canada, and Canada won 2-1 in Honduras.
Do you believe in miracles?
I do. You sexy thing.
Yeah, there you go.
Sexy thing, yeah.
For Honduras, for Canada, it's Freudian slip there. Look, it's a U20 friendly. It doesn't really matter. But what I think does matter about the U20 friendly, to make it serious for half a second, is that they're playing them down there. And I encourage the Canadian Soccer Association to stop flying themselves to bloody Korea to play a team that is way beyond their level, way out of their league. Play Honduras, play El Salvador, play Nicaragua, Jamaica, all these CONCACAF teams that aren't in. Play them. Get used to playing in CONCACAF. That's the value of going down there. That's the value of getting that 2-1 win, because jokes aside, the next time those kids go in, and there might only be one or two of them that go on to play at any level beyond, because the U20 program is like that. One or two might be generous. But even if there's one, the next time he goes into Honduras, he's going to go, I've won here. I'm not afraid of here. And that's important. Play more games down there. That's my message. That is my absolute message. Also, hashtag FH.
I have another kind of news in the bits and bytes, Duane, and I haven't talked to you about it. You know, we talk about the buzz and the Montreal buzz. The Big O is sold out, like I mentioned earlier, with probably just a few tickets available here and there individually. You can count them with probably the amount of fingers and toes you have. But just speaking of, it was supposed to be an RDS 2 because the Montreal Canadiens are playing as well that night. Well, guess what? It's now going to be played on RDS 1. Bigger viewership, the big channel, because the demand is there. A lot of people wrote to RDS enough that they decided to make that change over the last few days. And that is interesting to me that, look, Big O sold out 50,000. Yeah, we talked about the 15,000 because of the quick turnaround. But the club impressed everybody. Everybody went to their phone, got a ticket, filled the Big O, and now it's on the big channel. The Montreal Impact have come a long way in 2 years.
They have. I think certainly the opponent helps to sell the tickets too, because there's nothing Montreal likes more than to stick it to Toronto. So
it's not Columbus. Let's just put it that way. Like, it would not have been as easy to fill the Big O with Columbus. Let's just put it that way.
Exactly. I'm just quickly looking to see what the situation before we say goodbye on StubHub is on the secondary markets for that game. Here we go. Eastern Conference first leg. You can get tickets for around $30 right now. I mean, that's not too bad considering there's nearly 60,000 in there.
It's face value, basically.
Yeah. It looks like if you still want to go, you can get probably tickets on the secondary market, but there's less here than you'd think, and certainly you're sitting up top. There's not a ton down the lower bowl. So I anticipate that this game will be, if not 57,000, it'll be somewhere over 50,000. You add likely 35,000 at BMO Field for the return leg, because they haven't announced it yet, but there's suspicions that they're going to open the temporary seating up.
Oh, no, it will be open, yeah.
Yeah, so you could have 80,000 people watching two legs of a soccer match in this country, and it'd be an RDS normal. I mean, the bump it's a regular season Habs games, but keep in mind the Habs, the level of importance they have in that market is not really matched in any other market to any other team in North America, in my mind. The coverage that they get, the amount of importance they have, culturally even, it's significant for them to even bump a single regular season game of soccer is significant.
And just that hashtag math, it's actually over 90,000 that will be watching most of the game, because over 50 plus over 30, it's 90.
Hashtag math. Hashtag FH. Hashtag math.
One of the listeners, I think it's Tim, on social media made us that remark last week when we did the exact same mistake.
All right. Hashtag math. Hashtag FH. Hashtag goodbye. Hashtag, as always, to say goodbye, Kevin.
Hashtag 11 a.m. tomorrow morning for Soccer Today, and have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.